Welcome to the first in a series of trainings or presentations on trauma. Today, we will be laying the foundation of the impact of historical trauma on well-being outcomes for Native children, families, and communities. I'm Dr. Marilyn Zimmerman. I am the Senior Director of Policy and Programs at the National Native Children's Trauma Center at the University of Montana. And we're going to start out by getting you access to this presentation through the First and Second Ladies app. Sonia?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sonia Begay, and I'm the Executive Staff Assistant with the Navajo Nation Office of the First Lady and Second Lady. On the screen right now, you see a QR code. That QR code, when you hold your camera up to the QR code, it'll direct you to a link where you can download our app. It is a mobile app that is downloadable right now on the Google Play Store as well as Apple Store. Again, this is the app from the Office of the First Lady and Second Lady, where we share a lot of community events, events that our office is hosting, resources, and general education and informational content. So we encourage you to go now and download the app so that you can stay connected with our office. In addition, today's webinar will be streamed via the YouTube OPVP Communications channel. This webinar will be recorded and posted on the YouTube channel so you can access at a later date if you're unable to view us live or you would like to rewatch later. So thank you for attending our event today, and we hope that it serves you well, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. Thomas.
Welcome. Thank you for tuning into the first session of the Fireside conversation about trauma, resiliency, and hope with the Navajo Nation's First Lady and Second Lady. Hello to everyone tuning in by Zoom or by radio. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about trauma, resiliency, and hope. We have a lot of information to cover over 4 90-minute sessions. Please continue to join us. If you can't make it or miss any sessions, all sessions are being recorded and can be viewed later in the day or in the year. I want to let you know that all these sessions will be done in English because our presenters joining us from other tribal nations. Please help us out and translate for our elders or those who need it. We appreciate your understanding. We see that all our special guests and presenters have arrived. Welcome, and it is good to see everyone. Let's get started, and I will start off by getting us off in a good way with a small prayer. God Naha Nahalian, Hinada, Hedo, Kashmish Yajado, Ado Kashmish Bon Nada Sika, Ado Kodobin, yet Hinane Kagi, D trauma had no Hashint, a Hashin Sabe, Nila, Nik A, Behodikte, Ko the cousin Sana, no, Adota, Ado Ayam, Naha Chinet Hidal, Ado, An Hida, Hida Hill, Ado, the Nefat Beta, Hoyozita, MMIP, but no, but Ado. We need to Tajo don't done today case, to Hajon today case, that Hajo that Hajo Yatil Kit at the seat that they he can't deal with a codo, but not but I deal ask how late are the trauma, but the Niniki hard it land the hard it or how late are a been that deal, Nisto hate are a codo, Nas Nani Kato Hajonago. Ado Kodo, but Bahatsa the Sinigain, Hinanda, the Hanaj Nazini, but the Stundole, Adon he last so and had his Aden Nichanda Bahagi, Ado his last so a corn, Nahanas, Kado Cornita, Nda Kagi, Eba Hihasan, Ado Twido Sani, a Nahata Halian, Hatsada the Zinaiko Hika, Adon Hachin. Ado Alchindon Hikate, his Agobats of the Sindole, Ado Aqua, Navajo Nation, hit Ninita, dahis ago because ke hat inigo del chine ado bamado beje iske da hat ini bat so des dole ado kodo nasko e nik da til net dole don ha holian dole ich ha chiri en god hun so it des dole amen.
Thank you, Thomas. And now if you would like to guide us in our introductions.
Well, welcome for joining us. It's Ado has a la Thomas Cody when she has got on the the sunny buses team. Now Katie Nay, that's a chado my disgigi, that's another Dean Lay, the Bennett's Denver, Colorado, the AKC family programs, Banashnish, Dick Ade, Ashagade, Ade, Hitchi, Abena Edo. Should need be guest get that the ashagado the best jedo ado national kat asadon katay na kin na ko ben na do shize that inspired ako DKC family programs by national ado the bentad ad in our headquarters is in Seattle. KC Family Programs is the nation's largest operating foundation focusing on safety, reduction, and the needs of foster care in the United States. Our mission is to provide and improve, ultimately prevent the need for foster care. We are committed to building communities of hope, a nationwide effort to prevent the need for foster care by providing families to raise safe, happy, and healthy children. KC Family Program has a special agreement with the Navajo Nation. And in a partnership, we work together to build communities of hope and to uplift the resiliency of Navajo people and to care and love for their children in health and safe way. Over the years, we have worked together to develop strategies to safely reduce the need for foster care, embedding in every cornerstone of our work together in creating safe and healthy spaces to learn about trauma, resiliency, and understanding the tribal nations and sovereignty. KC program is happy to have National Native Children's Trauma Center at the University of Montana join us as our presenters for the series. Today, we will learn about the impacts of historical trauma and intergenerational trauma within our tribal families, communities with our presenters, Dr. Marilyn Zimmerman. She will introduce herself later. Please take a moment to download the information. That's where Dr. Zimmerman will have her slides. But first, let me introduce the president of the Navajo Nation, Shitile Jonathan Nez. President?
Good afternoon, everyone. Unfortunately, President Nez is experiencing some technical difficulties right now. We're not sure how long, if they'll get that resolved. But again, hello, Yate. My name is Sonia Begay, and I'm with the Office of the First Lady and Second Lady. And we would like to welcome you on behalf of the Office of the Vice President and Vice President. We wish you all a safe and wonderful holiday season. And as 2022 nears, we want to take the opportunity to look back on a year that turned out much differently than anyone could have imagined. While it was certainly challenging, it showed us how strong and resilient we are as Navajo people. For 21 months, many of us and many of our families have experienced emotional, mental, spiritual challenges and lifestyle changes. The world, including the Navajo Nation, felt the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic. Though many may not realize it, the emotional and mental turmoil can cause symptoms of trauma in both children and adults. The pandemic disoriented our daily normal routines. It disrupted our school, our workplaces, and family environments. And it also disrupted our ability to interact with our loved ones. When trauma goes untreated, it can cause decreased physical health, higher risk of suicide, and self-confidence, and greater risk of substance use. Symptoms of trauma can lead to nausea and vomiting, headaches, confusion, poor concentration, memory problems, anxiety, fear, irritability, and feelings of loss of control. Please remind yourself that you are not alone and everyone feels the emotional, physical, and mental impacts of COVID-19. As the new year approaches, we encourage you all to reflect on how far you and your families have come. You are the true meaning of resilience, a type of strength that was passed down to you from our grandparents and ancestors. The Office of the First Lady and Second Lady has recognized that many of our Navajo individuals and families need guidance and resources to begin healing and to recover from this pandemic. The Office of the First Lady and Second Lady has a strong focus to begin healing and recovering. We welcome you to the first installment of Fireside Conversations on Trauma, Resiliency, and Hope, which was made possible with a partnership between the Navajo Nation, Casey Family Programs, and the University of Montana's National Native Children's Trauma Center to help Navajo families and individuals. It is our hope that these sessions will allow you to begin the conversations within your own families about emotional and mental well-being. We will also be joined by Dr. Michelle Branzer of Navajo Department of Health. She will share information and available resources to you all.
Yeah, Sonia, and then also the Office of the President, thank you for providing those statements. The historical trauma, but no a but I don't, but I don't. As she not his better husband, height are able, Michi had the a bandage indoless the series go a quite bandage indoless, and they large a height out the in hitch and how it go has lego a a Dr. Branzer a hitch had what had a hot on to hard a and now it has no a other he cut or jai hollow the left. Dr. Branzer?
Actually, Thomas, Dr. Branzo will be introduced in just a moment. So I'm just going to proceed with the presentation as we have it ordered. Sorry about that, Thomas. Please forgive us for this little mix-up. So just wanted to talk to you very briefly about the National Native Children's Trauma Center and who we are. As I said earlier, I'm Dr. Marilyn Breuer Zimmerman, and I am a citizen of the Nakota and Dakota people of the Fort Peck-Assiniboine Sioux tribes that have our homelands and our reservation is in the northeast corner of Montana. I'm also a Nawa and Ojibwe descendant. We are very proud at the National Native Children's Trauma Center that our leadership and the majority of our staff are Native people from around the country. We have allies also hired to be that are critical to our success. And so we just really want to let you all know that we're very humbled and very delighted to be with you this afternoon. And we apologize that our Navajo citizen who is on staff, unfortunately, is out sick and couldn't participate today. She sends her regrets and she sends her greetings. So that's Veronica Waleto DeCrane. So the National Native Children's Trauma Center has been around since about 2007, a little bit earlier, and we were funded by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration to support American Indian and Alaska Native communities to become trauma informed. And so somewhere in the United States, we're probably working in a tribal community in any of the systems that you see listed here on this slide, helping those systems to become trauma informed. And becoming trauma informed is not a three-step process. It doesn't look the same in every tribal community. Every tribal community is unique and has unique needs and unique barriers and unique strengths. And so it looks completely different sometimes in the different systems that serve kids. It basically is a mindset, a worldview, a way of engaging professionally and personally with your clients, your students, your patients, your staff members, and your family and community members in a way that's thoughtful, informed about the impacts of trauma on well-being, and supportive and empathetic towards everyone. So that's what we're going to be discussing as a part of this Fireside series. So just wanted to let you know a bit about who we are. Today, we'll define historical trauma in the context of those tribal Native researchers who have done a lot of research in Indian country around this notion of historical trauma. We're going to define it a bit from their perspective, but I would like to invite you all to think about how you define historical trauma in your local context. How does your community think about or talk about historical trauma? Is it even discussed, or are there protocols that have to be involved in order to have these discussions? So think about that during the presentation, and please be willing to share. We're going to look at and recognize some common historical trauma experiences, identify some current impacts of historical trauma, and finally end it with a brief description of protective factors that build resilience. As Sonia made in earlier comments, we know we are a resilient people. We are still here. Tribes have done the best job of responding to this global pandemic of COVID-19 of any communities in the nation. And so we should be very proud of ourselves, but we also have to acknowledge that the stressors around the impacts of experiencing the sometimes loss that we face, the grief and loss that we face in our communities also and in our families, have to be acknowledged also. So let's get started. Excuse me. We want to always, whenever we're talking about trauma, so I'll describe a little bit about and try to define trauma early in the slides. We want to remind you that many times we don't think a lot of these experiences that we talk about or examples that we give should be triggering, but if they are, just know that it can be a reminder and cause some upset feelings. And so we want to always provide support and think about what that looks like. So if upset feelings don't subside after this presentation, we really encourage people to talk to a trusted person, a colleague, a pastor, a priest, a mental health professional, a best friend. We also want to always encourage taking part in healing practices and whatever that means in your local community, whether you are participating in local traditional tribal healing practices or the healing practices of your faith. I will let Dr. Branson introduce herself again and talk much more about the text crisis line 741-741 to communicate with the crisis counselor. I just want to say that that this is an amazing resource. It's national. You just have to text them and say hello, and you can start a conversation to communicate about any kind of crisis. It's not necessarily a crisis about suicide or anything really dramatic. It could be a teenager in rural Montana who is struggling with their sexual identity and just needs some advice or some understanding around what they're experiencing. It could be an elder who's just reaching out because they might be experiencing some symptoms that they want to ask about, physical symptoms like whether or not they need to call for medical services. It could be someone who's experiencing food insecurity or housing insecurity. So we just really want to promote the crisis text line. I always like to promote the crisis text line because we have become not just a particular generation, but a nation that really responds, and we use our text daily. I taught graduate students in social work, and I could never reach them, or I can never reach them via email or even when I call their phones. But if I text them, I've got an answer in 5 minutes. So it's not just this generation, but all the generations. We tend to use the crisis or to use text to communicate a lot. So really want to promote that crisis text line number. Dr. Branson.
Yes, this is Michelle, or Dr. Branzer. Yeah. So I'm coming to you from here in Winter Rock, Arizona, Division of Behavioral and Mental Health Services, NASHNISH, and the Behavioral Health Treatment Centers. There's 11 of them throughout Navajo Nation. And so as HSA or Health Services Administrator, we work at helping and making sure their local resources are able to be accessible. We know the pandemic, COVID-19, as I said earlier, has been very challenging across the world globally, but even more home in our communities. And so I wanted to share a little bit about what, as the Mental Health Coalition, we've been working on to make sure those resources get out to you all there. Even if you're not in Arizona, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, looking at the Four Corners areas, which is around our Dinek area. And a little bit more about me again. My clans are Nasht Eje, Nishle, Tobajni Aji Bashashin, Kia Ani, Dashanale, Ado, Torachini, Dashache. And I come from the Gallup area, Nanajojigo, Toba, Wizgane, which is Pinedale, New Mexico. So I'm going to share my screen here and show you how you can navigate to this local resource guide. So you should be seeing it now. And in the chat, the links should also be posted. So this is the Navajo Department of Health website. What you would do is go to COVID-19. There's a whole bunch of tabs or resources here, but when you look under the mental health resources, you would click on this. And it will give you more information that even Dr. Zimmerman just stated. And so with that, within DBMHS, we also have established some mental health helplines to help, with any emotional or challenges, just needing a person to talk to, support lines. But the resource guide is on this wording here when it says download Navajo area directory and resource PDF. You would click on that. And I'm going to make this bigger for you all. Oh, that might be a little too big. Let's go back. Okay. So it'll look like this. Navajo area directory and resources. So what we did, meaning the Mental Health Coalition, which consists of IHS, Indian Health Services, as well as the 638 healthcare corporations and the Navajo Department of Health Programs, is put together this resource booklet. And I'm just going to quickly describe some of the areas you'll find. This one is talking about the mental health clinics or personnel that is listed that you can reach out to. And we're looking to continue to update this information because sometimes it can get, numbers can change and need to always update it. And in the red, you'll see the 638 healthcare facilities. And that would be Tsatsua Medical Center. Okay. And then these are the other areas for social services, which is more social work in the hospital setting. And again, IHS 638 in red. And Sarasota Medical Center, close by again in Fort Defiance, Gallup Indian Medical Center. And again, we do our best to keep this updated, but it is a pretty extensive resource listing. We've also included alcohol and substance abuse programs within IHS and 638s as well. And you can see this here with Crown Point, and then also Winslow, which is a 638 facility. And go down a little bit more. We also included other 638s that may not necessarily be on Navajo, which would be the IHS, the urban, you see it in Flagstaff there. So we also have included those resources as well. For those of you in Shiprock, Northern Navajo Medical Center. And then because, like I said, Department of Health consists of many programs. One that we wanted to ensure was in our resource booklet is social services with the Navajo Treatment Center for Children and their families. And again, breaking that down, into the different regions, area offices. So you'll see them here. And then we've also included Division of Behavioral Mental Health Services. We, like I said, have 11 treatment center sites throughout Navajo, and our central office is here in Winter Rock, Arizona. And we also have the REBA program. Some of you may be aware of Arizona Access, Arizona Medicaid programs, and we do work with them, and that is our Navajo REBA program. And then this is letting you know more about our sites. In New Mexico as well. And again, I'm kind of scrolling, hopefully not too fast. This is the CHRs, the community health representatives in the different areas. And so if, some of you, if you've utilized them or they've come into the home to help during certain times, their numbers are listed here. And so you see, we do need to change one name. Individual Major Lane Begay has retired actually as of this past September. So I need to update this, as I said. And then we've included other public health service, areas like the police, fire departments, and then the crisis lines, which Dr. Zimmerman mentioned just previously before. We've also included domestic violence resources with their surrounding four corner states again. So there are a lot of resources available to us here on Navajo. And this is the next section I'd like to point out is what we call a safety plan, which is if someone's in crisis, meaning they're wanting to hurt themselves, threatening to, end their life or hurt somebody else. This is where persons like myself, a clinician, or even a concerned family member can assist somebody in this time of need with a safety plan. And sometimes it's just really listening and helping an individual during this crisis or getting them to the emergency room or somewhere a safe place. So this, we can go into more later, but the steps are here available that we put as well. And then also, if you're able to get that individual, they need to be in a more safe environment. That hopefully that if it's an emergency or a medical facility would be able to assist you with follow-up appointments as well. And these are just, as we stated, this world has changed more with internet and virtual type of resources. And these are actually phone apps that can be downloaded into your phone, like Google Play, which was mentioned earlier for First Lady and Second Lady's app. With their cute, these ones are really nice apps. I've used them myself just to, know what is a good resource for individuals. But I also want to say that some we know as Division of Behavioral Mental Health Services is, we just want to make sure the resources are there. However, we do know some of our relatives may not have access to internet or good service out there. And so it is meaning that relationship we have can be the most helpful when these types of resources cannot be connected to at that time. But as you work to get your loved one or someone that you care about to the right services, those are some local resources we'd like to share with you. Thank you. Go ahead. Back to you, Dr. Zimmerman.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Brownser. I appreciate. We're so excited. You have quite a comprehensive resource guide. We're always so excited to provide national resources, but it's much more important to provide those local resources. So thank you very much. So let's begin the conversation. and that's what I'm hoping we're going to have a little bit today, is to have a conversation about historical trauma. We'll do an exercise together describing the boarding school experience and how it may have impacted generations of our families. But I want it to be a conversation, so please feel free to make a statement or ask a question in the chat. We have a chat monitor who will then, I don't mind being interrupted, will interrupt me or ask the question at the appropriate time, or share a comment. So please feel free to participate in this conversation. So why do we need to talk about trauma? We like to think of it as the most pressing health issue that can contribute to our well-being today is some of the adverse childhood experiences that we may have experienced in childhood. There was a study done in the late 1990s called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and it looked at the adverse childhood experiences and its connection to later health outcomes for middle-aged and older adults. And the study was done in San Diego, California, with a mostly white, very well-insured group of participants. And they found that there are 10 childhood experiences that really have an impact. And examples are parents being divorced, parent being incarcerated, a parent being impaired either because of substance use disorders or a mental health disorder like depression or anxiety, household chaos, exposure to neglect, exposure to violence in your household or by your caregivers. So it really gave a direct correlation between what happens to us really impacts what kind of well-being we have later on in life. So that's why we need to talk about trauma. And we also want to really focus and say that trauma is preventable in the sense that if we learn how to be loving, nurturing, caring parents and relatives, we can forego a lot of the impacts of trauma, negative impacts of trauma or trauma exposure. Life is life, right? We are going to have traumatic experiences because none of us gets through life without them. But how we figure out and support one another really does is the process of prevention of the impacts for those trauma. If you have had a traumatic childhood or a traumatic adulthood, or we want to really hold up the hope that people can heal. We all can heal. And finally, it asks the right question. A long time ago, my grandmother raised me, and she used to say to some of my relatives, shaking her finger, and she would ask this, she would say, "What's wrong with you? Sober up, get your kids back. What's wrong with you? Treat that woman right. Get your family back together." Well, we know now that it's really not appropriate or helpful to ask people what's wrong with them. Instead, we should be asking what's happened to them. What's happened to you? And not just what's happened to you, but how do you remember it? How do you make meaning out of that event, right? So we've learned to ask the right question, and that is the basis of our conversation today too. So I want to briefly describe the types of trauma that we're talking about. So acute trauma is that something that happens once, a car wreck, a range fire, an emergency medical procedure. It's that one-time event that can happen in your life. That's usually not the kind of traumas that we're talking about. We're talking about the kind of chronic traumas that people experience in their childhood and in their lives, where the neglect is ongoing or the abuse is ongoing, and it seems to be chronic, and it really does have a much more deeper impact. And then we have what is known as complex trauma, which is the same thing as chronic trauma, but thinking about it in the terms of it's usually at the hands of a caregiver, right? Those people that are supposed to love us and care for us the most are the ones who are perpetrating the neglect or the violence against us. There is historical trauma that we'll talk about today, And for many of us, particularly those of us who are in human service types of professions, we really have to look at the impacts of secondary traumatic stress, which is really basically the price we pay, or it's called the cost of caring for some of us. And it's really figuring out how to address or think about working with people who have experienced a lot of trauma impacts as professionals, our well-being. So that we'll be discussing some of those strategies also within the context of how to heal and healing from the traumas. So let's now move on to the discussion for today, which is the foundation of historical trauma. Okay. So why do we need to talk about historical trauma? This is a picture of multi-generations of a Native family. And we need to talk about it because generations of families who've experienced the collective traumas of their community, it impacts not just their community, but it impacts their families and themselves directly. So that's why we're going to talk about historical trauma. We have to think, now remember I asked you at the beginning of this presentation to really think about how you talk about historical trauma in your local community or in your local or in your family. Well, we want to understand historical trauma from a political point of view, understanding that it was that the historically traumatic events that impacted entire communities, tribes, clans, had to do with the political policies of the federal government in their attempts to either assimilate or annihilate American Indian people or indigenous people in North America. We also have to note that we have a political identity. We are sovereign nations. Therefore, this unique political identity creates an interesting relationship with the US government. We don't have just a racial or ethnic identity. We are identifying as sovereign nations, and the expectations or the disappointments or the of what the political promises that have been made that have not been fulfilled. For example, depending on which historian you talk to, there are something like over 400 US treaties made between American Indian tribes and in America and the United States government. And to date, not one treaty has been fully honored, so that it can have an impact. We're going to look a little bit at the psychological impacts of historical trauma, the impacts of boarding school experience, the impacts of removal, thinking about how children were removed in the 50s and 60s during the child welfare scoop, what that can look like, and current impacts on our psychological, emotional well-being. We'll take a brief look at that. We'll look at the research around the psychological impacts for today. There is other research that talks about other impacts that we won't be discussing today because of lack of time. And then finally, just again, really thinking about that tribal community and local events. For instance, for Montana tribes, there is not one reservation or one tribe in this state that did not experience what we call the starvation winter, where the Bureau of Indian, the agency cattle wagon didn't either, because of weather, didn't make it to the reservation in time. And so my Nakona people were nearly wiped out through starvation. Our old people and our children died from starvation. But I can't remember how many lodges. I want to say we had a few hundred lodges, but by the time spring came, there was probably only 30 lodges. So there are those very specific historical events that are impacting your community uniquely. So Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart is the first Native researcher to really coin the phrase around historical trauma. I'm sure many of you know that she, during graduate school, she was looking at the research around Holocaust survivors for Jewish immigrants who had experienced the death camps in Europe during World War II. And there was some research coming out that showed that the children and the grandchildren of these survivors living in the United States were having the same psychological and emotional and behavioral responses as their grandparents or parents, though they had never experienced being in a concentration camp. And she began to think about I wonder if this could be an explanation for what's going on in my family's community. We are a people who are vibrant and alive and talented and brilliant and skilled and loving and nurturing, yet we continue to struggle with chronic unemployment. We continue to struggle with family violence. We continue to struggle with substance use disorders. We continue to struggle in chronic poverty. What else, could this be the explanatory factor that sort of explains why we continue to have these struggles? Dr. Teresa Evans Campbell talks about historical trauma and defines it as a collective complex trauma inflicted on a group of people who share a specific group identity or affiliation. It's the legacy of numerous traumatic events a community experiences over generations and encompasses psychological and social responses to those events. And so that's what we're going to look at today. So here's some example of historical trauma events. So many have heard the stories of the smallpox blankets that were purposefully infected in order to infect tribal people so that they would die off. We know Europeans brought diseases to North America that we had no resistance to. Again, the starvation, the removal from our homelands, the forced migration and relocation often included starvation, either along the way or once we were relocated on our reservations. The boarding school experience, which we'll discuss, the thought about broken treaties, the separation of our families, either through removal or through, again, that forced migration and relocation, the criminalizing of our spirituality, our healing ways, our ways of coping and restoring ourselves. And then again, just the formation or the placing of on reservations. Some of us, for Navajo and for my Nakota people, we are blessed in the fact that my family continues to live on my ancestral homelands, as do yours. So we've been impacted, but maybe not as greatly as those who were forced in relocation. So we want to take a look, and so one of the things that has come out of the historical trauma theory is that some other tribal or native researchers have said, really, does what happened to my grandmother in boarding school, or what happened to my family during the winter of 1812 have anything to do with my stress and that's happening to me today, my emotional response to some things? So there were some people that sort of scoffed at it. And so Les Whitbeck and his colleagues wanted to try to quantify historical trauma. And so they created a historical trauma and loss scale. And so it looks at the recurrent thoughts of historical cultural losses and the kind of stress it creates and impacts with adults and adolescents, and what the current conditions may result in historical causes, but their origins or symptoms may be attributed to contemporary spirits. So what happened historically impacts us and attributes to some of our contemporary responses. So let's take a look. So here's the kinds of questions that Dr. Whitbeck and his colleagues asked of this participant of this research study that had elders and adolescents. And they asked about how often, what's the frequency do you think about these losses? How often do you think about the loss of land or language or losing spiritual ways, the loss of family ties because of boarding schools, the loss of self-respect from poor treatment by government officials, the losses from the effects of alcoholism on our people, the losses of respect for our children and grandchildren, for our elders, and loss of our people through early death. And you can see that on a monthly or weekly, let's take a look at the weekly, because I think this is pretty fascinating, or even daily. So almost 30% of this group study of American Indians think about the loss of our language, their language every single day. 25% think about the loss of their spiritual ways every single day, going all the way down to the loss of our culture. 25% of us think about it every single day. 30% think about all of the people that we've lost, either their health or through death. Every single day. 28% the loss of respect for our children, towards our elders. 24 and 25%, again, loss of people through early death, and loss of respect by our children for our traditional ways. But then the next question had to be, okay, so you think about these losses quite a bit, like weekly, daily, right? Especially daily. But what do you really have an emotional response when you think about those losses? And so, yep, they do. They have feelings of sadness, anger, nervousness, fearful, or just they've lost sleep, they feel isolated, there's a loss of concentration, a sense of shame. So let's look at sometimes. So 44% of us feel sad or depressed when we think about these losses. 38 feel anger. 25% have a lack of concentration sometimes when they think about the losses. 22% of us sometimes feel like it's happening all over again. And another 22%, we feel like avoiding the places or people that remind them of those losses. And what does that look like in your community? What kind of avoidant behaviors do we engage in? I have a friend who just won't leave the res. He says that everything I need is right here, but I don't know if that's the truth or if it's avoidant behavior, because leaving the reservation provides reminders to him of the kinds of losses that we've experienced as a people. So we can see that historically, those traumas that impacted our tribe, our clans, our families, are having an impact on us today, emotionally. So we have to really understand that even though these historical losses experienced by us as Indigenous people, they're really not historical in the sense that they happened a long time ago. And suddenly we have a new life. Rather, they are historical in that they originated a long time ago, but they persisted. And that is a big piece of the conversation. So thus far, we've defined historical trauma. Dr. Branzer, would you like to add any comments at this point?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that, Dr. Zimmerman. And yes, I'll just share a couple comments. The research definitely reminds me, brings me back to, how in that Western way of how we look at it as researchers, and how our lives continually can feel like, are we moving forward? I guess brings forward questions in that regard. And so with resilience, I know we'll be talking about that soon, but knowing that the trauma and our elders, Hasuitos, Sanis, that have lived through these challenging time periods, and as they move forward to today's time, still want the very best for their children, the that are, going to be carrying on into the future. And I can see that with that term historical, as we continue to move forward and know that even the stories that maybe we heard growing up that was for a purpose, that we wouldn't necessarily stay in a realm of being stuck, like we're still in the trauma, and I think that's the hardest maybe part of healing or moving forward, is that if Kildan, like long time ago this happened, maybe our elders would say, but they can wonder, maybe are we moving forward if you talk about the language that in that chart that was shown, more or less not being able to maybe speak Diné fluently, or whatever your tribal language or indigenous language is, it can produce those losses. And so I think those can be still seen today as we strive to not lose what we have, in a sense, not necessarily lose it as in like we're not going to ever have it, but we want more of it. We have those feelings or maybe thoughts and how it affects our mental health or our emotional health or spiritual health. And so I just wanted to add those comments from the slides, because it is something where, today, bringing it fast forward even to COVID and the pandemic and other losses we continue to face in certain realms, and not, I don't want to say give up, but, see how our resiliency is going to help us have those abilities to continue on. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand that the President and First Lady Nez are able to reconnect and are able to share a few words. I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you. So please feel free to share, President and First Lady. There you go. There you are. We can't hear you.
Can you all hear us now? And thank you for your patience. Aro kodo hanet yagi ya na antenata ado konshi he patka halna akunde yisishi kon kedo hajonda hado tleta no jo hot ya DJ Baho kodo sado Vice President Lizer best Dari Lizer ya ada ilala ba heni tsindo she kodo ashin chino tnesa ne bashin twedichi ni da shi chiro tkachi ni da shinala so ya te dan hidi need of that ko hich how zigi Marilyn Zimmerman, Otto Kono, Rashindo, Tandalish, Thomas Cody, Dr. Michelle Brands, Otto Sachinan Kon, Kagish Kijidan, without a Yahanet Hijayla. Share ya, you see, with the natural Hasti, a ya, Hadaino Snehat, Nana in Anki. Sashi Lakon, he came, he nan. Sorry, we have our kids in the room. I don't know. Jadi ha ishin kitli ha ishin kos nitskagi it's akta. Ani tsko asani taho asani zino. Nihidet yo ati ha ishin na antin nas kode na egi to ebini na ekon ben that meeting. Ado the neck HA creature bend that meeting. Binda a hot out sasi tingi the questions kagina has states at the Banda who is Nahish, Nino, Nahachin, Nahanda, Nishido, Nahanda, Rahagi, Judibi kitchen de pa. Ado such an econ additionally an hit or Nihin dust. Say ya Dada a Shemayago. And lay shot toward a put out that Ilia, Nachicodelia, and it's architan. Eat the more not Kishmish, Yazia da, but on his horn. Ado, yo Kishmish that see clean at all on the Jadas. Tashin hit out. Kadabaka, even in a deep hot aho in a film. The Yale, the Jane dots, the Dots, Nihe o la to nihe tsuzinshi ya be ani ero la to le naso ne thing. Even in AD National Native Children's Trauma Center, University of Montana, and first and second ladies office. So AC family, jido hot kai je to hot hanen jido da ya thing. Ado di hanen to oyen je ni jedas tifigi ya be she what abi chidi khash thing. Jodo kenda hado tlefadi no hot ya khon na ho Ado ashi so hado the neck achini see. Yeah, I in Navajo, for us as Navajos, speaking in our native tongue is very powerful, and speaking directly to our people is needed, and we have been encouraged throughout this administration. I'd like to talk about resiliency as well. As I said in Navajo, you can talk historical trauma, you can talk intergenerational trauma, talk about trauma, but that's something that we can overcome as a nation. Our ancestors overcame this. I know it's hard to comprehend how our ancestors overcame adversity because it happened decades, hundreds of years ago. But let me put it into the context of today, ladies and gentlemen. We are going through a pandemic in our lifetime. We have the front row seat of resiliency, ladies and gentlemen. Seeing how now people have overcome these different times through these 20 so odd months. And we help each other, and we have to come together as one to move forward. With this COVID-19, we've learned a lot from one another. We learn how to help each other out. We've learned to take care of our elders. And we also learned that we shouldn't just be fearful. The challenge throughout this pandemic to our Navajo people, to you, was to teach your children about our way of life, to also teach our language to our younger generation. We were locked up. We were told to stay home. But the challenge was that our way of life teaching would move to the next generation. And I applaud many of you who have took that challenge to instill into our younger generation the resiliency story of our Navajo people. We have gone through much, and we have to restore that balance. I know many of you that are watching today are having some hardship. Now, I said in Navajo, we buried our niece yesterday, and it was sad. Many of us have gone through a traumatic moment in our lives, I'm sure, either by seeing someone catch COVID or losing a loved one, or still trying to heal from COVID-19. But let me just say that with our teaching and the support of one another, we can overcome these difficult times. And I want to say that message. I know that we may overthink some of these things that are being discussed. Some of them are very high and very technical. But we have the ability to overcome these difficult times. Self-reliance, self-sufficiency, bootstrap mentality, to be able to mirror that and magnify that to our people, because our ancestors have done that. And we're going to do it through this COVID-19 as well. People counted us out, right? Last year, all in the national media, poor Navajos. Don't buy into that, ladies and gentlemen. We have overcome these tough times in our history, and we have overcome some of the difficult adversities that have come. Those of us that are still here, we still have a job to do on this earth. And we appreciate each and every one of you out there for adhering and following healthcare professionals and your leaders. That's where it starts. Now everybody's looking at Navajo and saying, how did Navajo do it? How did they have 72% of their Navajo people vaccinated? Why is their elders 65 and over, 87% fully vaccinated? Because our elders lead the charge. Our elders hold that key, and it's being shared with us, and it's being shared with you all today. So I'm here to encourage you, and I hope to inspire you, those of you who are listening right now. Let us not feel guilt because we may have brought the virus into our homes and feel like it was my fault that so-and-so might have caught the virus or passed away. It is now time for us to have a dialogue, a true discussion, an honest discussion about how we're feeling, because that's where Hajon and balance will start and will be replaced by hope and resilience. So with that said, thank you for joining us. I apologize for the earlier mishap, and turn the time over to our First Lady of the Navajo Nation, Cecilia Nez.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yatse. It's good to see everybody from the NNCTC, all the staff there, and then of course our own staff from Navajo, and then Thomas, Cody from Casey Family Programs. I'm originally from Big Mound in Arizona, second lady from the beginning. We've always focused on the home and the family. And then of course, as I do my work with First Things First, all revolving around early childhood education, development, and mental health, and just really a background in criminal justice and how there's a link between the early years of life and then of course, you know, the outcomes of that person's, our children's lives later on. And so, and then now talking about, you know, the ACEs study that was done, which was covered, and, you know, it just brings to light just really the importance of the early years of a child's life, of a person's life. And then of course, the environment, the home environment that they're raised in, and whether or not there were supportive parents or systems in place for, you know, to help them along. And just looking at data and everything else that we know from tribal communities, and even in our own communities, you see just a lot of those things lacking in a lot of our children's lives, and probably in our own lives as well. And then you look at our parents and our grandparents and some of the things that they've gone through. But, you know, it doesn't, it's important to shed light on those items, because when we're talking about restoration of families and strengthening of families, you have to go back to these types of conversations and to really acknowledge that these things, you know, are a part of probably all of our lives as Native people. And so with these series, we wanted to just focus just on what, with this first session, really just the, in layman's term, what we're talking about when we're talking about trauma, and just how that affects a person's life. You know, we talk about bad, you know, the negative outcomes, but you can also see that it goes into affecting the way our brain develops, the way, you know, everything that we do, who we are, and the way we behave, and all of that. And so I'm just very thankful to Casey Family Programs, and then of course the National Native Children's Trauma Center, all the staff who are here, who partnered with our office to bring these educational webinars to Navajo Nation. And of course, it can be viewed by anybody out in the world, because you can it will be, a recording of this will be on OPVP, Navajo Nation OPVP Communications on the YouTube. So, so thank you again. The Fireside Conversations on Trauma, Resiliency, and Hope. And that's what we titled this 4-part series. So session 1 for today's, it's historical and intergenerational trauma. Session 2 is going to be December 30th. Come back for that, and the topic there will be the impacts of trauma. And then session 3 and 4 are in January. January 12 will be building resilience. And then session 4, January 14th, will be faith, belief, and hope. So really come back. We invite you to watch all 4 sessions. And Office of First Lady, Second Lady, you know, we're here to share information, resources, and community events. And a lot of those we post on our mobile app. You can download the app from Apple Store or Google Play Store. And so through these various events, you know, our focus is to provide information that families can utilize and incorporate into their own lives. And I cannot stress enough the importance of faith, and you can always turn to prayer. And I think by the 4th session, you're going to really get to hear and see what a major role our faith and our prayers really do play in our lives. And so thank you again to everyone who's watching, and we'll see you back here again on Thursday for the next session. So
Right. And I just want to also just say thank you to the First and Second Lady for putting on these events. And let us also remind ourselves of the strength of our Navajo people. It's the strength of our Navajo people that has gotten us to this point in time. Now it's our turn as a nation, as a people, to think of our great, great, great grandchildren. And I know that we can break some of these generational curses that have been following many of us throughout time. And we have the opportunity to do that by talking to professionals. And those professionals are available. And I think Dr. Branzer will be giving more information about that. And I appreciate Sonia and Eli and our PVP staff for supporting this fireside chat. So Thomas Dr. Brandon Junago funerals today Saturday and the seatling upon the Aquichishi a Sadigi a so on of school. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, President and First Lady. Very much appreciated. All right, we'll keep moving on here. So we're going to take a quick look at removal, particularly with boarding schools. Here's, everyone's heard of the Carlisle Indian School. Here's a quote by Pratt, who's basically is known for saying, kill the Indian, save the man. That was the strategy for assimilation. And that is probably where some of our most resilient people who came home had experiences. I don't have time to do the boarding school experience if I want to do the other slides, so I'll just very briefly describe it to you. I want you to visualize a very large conference room. I want you to visualize about 100 people in that conference room. And I have a prayer bundle that has some of my prayer elements that include sage and sweetgrass and anointing oil. That would be my prayer bundle, and I would place it gently and respectfully on the floor. I would probably have one of my colleagues play the child. So that person would come to the front of the room and stand with their feet gently leaned up against the prayer bundle. I would use my Nakona way of describing children and how we view children pre-contact and still today. We believe that children came down from the stars, from Creator. They came with knowledge of all creation. They came with ancient knowledge, and they came to bring us the gifts of themselves and gifts and lessons that the Creator wanted for this particular mom and dad. Then I would ask mom and dad to come up and describe how they felt towards the child. They would then ask 2 sets of grandparents to come up and describe how they felt towards the child. Then I would ask probably 10 aunties and uncles to come up and come around that child. And then I would ask elders to come up and come around that child. And at each one, we would process, how do you feel towards this child? And so if we had time today, I would ask you as a parent, how would you feel towards this child, this gift from Creator, as a grandparent? And some of the answers are really that people describe their role within the life of the child. I feel responsible. I feel honored, by the responsibility. I feel blessed by Creator that He gifted us with this child. I feel like our medicines will go on. I feel like our songs will continue to live. Elders might say our people will continue to go on for generations. And the last group would be warriors. And I would ask them how they felt towards this child. And they would talk about their role as protectors and providers. And so I want us to think about pre-contact, the way that the community was organized, and maybe still is in some of our communities, where the focus is the well-being of the child, and everyone has a role and a place in that child's well-being. And then the exercise, I would come and I'd rip the child out from amongst the group of people, and I would send them off where you couldn't see them. And you very often can feel the pain of that loss. And so we would process the pain of that loss and what it meant. And suddenly people would feel purposeless, and suddenly they would feel like they didn't have a hope or a future. They would feel like that they were angry or blaming each other. Why couldn't you keep the children in here? Why couldn't you keep her home? Why didn't you protect us? Why didn't you talk to the agent with more wisdom? How come I've lost this child? Then we would bring back the child. We would process that and process what kinds of behaviors we might engage in towards one another. We might treat each other badly. We might be violent towards each other. We might try to numb with the use of alcohol. We might try to numb with going after different relationships, trying to find some sort of connection that we had lost because of the loss of the child. And then I would bring the child back into that room, and we would discuss what had happened to the child. And my Nakona name is her white buffalo calf. And I would say her white buffalo calf left, and Susie came back. And Susie experienced all sorts of deprivations at boarding school. So she left at 5, and now she's back at 17, and she experienced hunger. She experienced physical coldness, emotional and psychological coldness, right? There was no nurturing, loving going on in those boarding school experiences. What this child had experienced in the context of their parents, their grandparents, their aunties, uncles, and elders was a very nurturing, wholesome, loving, supportive environment, right? And there was all of these different tribal cultural ways of parenting, tribal cultural ways of teaching, tribal cultural ways of engaging in relationship, unique to that tribe. So she comes back as Susie, and she doesn't know any of that. She may have lost a good portion of her language. She not only experienced those deprivations of warmth and food, but she also experienced harsh treatment or abuse at the hands of the administrators and the teachers and the staff at those boarding schools. She may have experienced sexual abuse. So she comes back with maybe all she is able to do is relate to an adult man in a sexualized way. And one of the first things that she does when she returns home is engage in a behavior with an uncle that's very inappropriate according to her tribal ways. She doesn't know better. It shames him and it shames her, and her parents are ashamed. So that further isolates her, right? They might even have a sense of anger or, okay, thank you. I won't rush too bad. So we have this notion of just really her having a lack of the ability to connect. She can't speak with her grandmother because she doesn't know the language well enough. She doesn't remember enough of it. She can't participate in any family ceremonial ways because she's forgotten them. She's been sexually abused. She's been abused. So she comes back and she's been pitted against other children at the boarding school to survive. So tribes were pitted against other tribes. Different families were pitted against other families. Lighter skinned native people fared better than darker skinned, right? And everybody needed to, everybody who experienced favor experienced better food, right? Better blankets. So it really had an impact on how her worldview. So at the end of the exercise, at this point, we start to talk about how she feels. She feels isolated. She would describe her feelings of feeling isolated, alone, uncared about. The family might describe their feelings of embarrassment or shame at her behaviors. And we would discuss how challenging this was for children that came home to families, and how generations of our families experienced that. And Susie came home and she met Joey, and Joey had the same experience, and in his boarding school, and they come together and they've lost those traditional parenting ways, and they have a family. And so they lost a lot of the ways and lost a lot of the support of their extended family just because of that boarding school experience. So when we would process this and discuss this, and then I would ask the group, how do we bring this child back home? How do we bring Susie back into family and community? What does that look like in this community? And so it's very much, however the tribe is, they would describe how they would do it. But very often, we can't do ceremony here, right? In this conference room. But I would say, so how do we bring her back in the circle like she was before? And usually someone who's a grandma in real life and then plays a grandma will come out from among the crowd and will go up and hug Susie and wrap her arms around her and bring her back into the circle, into the center of the life of this family and this community, and welcome her home. And you can feel in the room the tension just leave. You can feel and know that Susie's going to be okay, and so is this family, and so is this community. And so that is known as the boarding school exercise. And it really highlights what we've lost, many of us, many families, generations of families, what our generations have lost with that boarding school or removal experience from their households. I know for my Nakona people, there are certain ways that we hold babies, care about babies, that sort of thing. So it's just so much of that has been lost, but mostly it's just that loving, nurturing environment was lost. So it really, boarding school experiences for many generations of people it created this shame, guilt, or remorse for their past behaviors, right? It really does impact today parent-child relationships. Sometimes traumatic memories for a lot of our young moms or older moms can be triggered by their children, just by their children's behaviors, right? And so they don't want to, but can end up abusing their children as a way to sort of try to manage their children's behavior or control their children's behavior. There's a lack of exposure to good parenting models, right? Like I described before, engaging in coercive or punitive parenting. And then not just the historical, but the contemporary traumas that many of our parents experience really impacts their ability to regulate their emotions or to soothe their own children, or even skews some of their judgments about the safety of themselves and their children. I'm going to skip comments here, Dr. Branzer, I'm sorry. The other piece of it's what often happens to an individual with a historical trauma response is they have a easy identification with the dead. They may experience psychic numbing. They may have a victim identity. They may be fixated on the trauma or survival guilt. I'm doing really well and my family isn't doing very well, and I don't know how I feel about that. So these are, you'll see on the left, the historic events, and then sometimes the current impacts, examples, poor economic, persistent discrimination, our health disparities, our underfunding of service systems, and our disparities in child protection. The historical traumas today for individuals can be a weak ethnic identity. Historical loss reminders can impact us to the point that we abuse or become addicted to substances. It can impact families where there's severed family roles, loss of cultural pension practice, and those sorts of things. And then at a community level, it's a feeling of a loss of sovereignty or severed unhelpful policies, and this notion of lateral violence that we're going to discuss next. I'm going to skip this. As part of I'm going to discuss lateral violence in the context of historical trauma in service setting. The First Lady asked if I would describe this a little bit and its impact on the service providers' relationships with those that they serve, patients, students, clients, right, customers. So there's a general mistrust between both the client and the provider. There's cumulative traumas that have impacted the worldviews, how they view helpful relationships or how they view helping relationships. For example, many people with extensive trauma history in a service setting are either, avoidant, like missing appointments, don't want to talk to you, not answering phone calls, that sort of thing, or they're standing in front of you screaming that they want to be served right now, that they need service immediately. A lot of our services come from a very Western perspective that, as Dr. Branster described earlier, and a lot of, so maybe not on Navajo, but many of our reservations across the United States are the providers have a lack of cultural knowledge or competency around who we are as a people, as individuals, and as unique tribes. So here's the piece about lateral violence. Lateral violence is this notion that when people are both the victims of a situation in dominance and they turn on each other rather than confront the system, right? So for example, obviously those children in boarding school could not confront the administrators, the teachers, and the staff of the boarding school who were neglecting or abusing them. So instead they had to take it out on someone, right? So they start to take it out on each other. It can look like anger. It can look like behaviors like jealousy, gossiping, put downs or blaming. It can look like, grassroots level organizations looking down on formal agencies like child welfare agencies or adoption agencies or IHS, or it can look like IHS looking down on grassroots organizations. It's city, those that are urban look down on reservation, reservation can look down on urban. Some people even look down on those with blood quantum that's been used to divide us. So how do we address it for instance, in the workplace? And I feel really bad that I'm rushing. So I'm just, Sonia has asked that I take my time, Thomas. So I'm going to slow down a little bit. So addressing lateral violence, we have to create an awareness of this phenomenon. What is it? What is lateral violence? What does it look like, right? What are some of the characteristics of it? We have to perform informative and education campaigns in order to be able to identify and implement prevention strategies. We need to help our workforce develop assertive communication rather than aggressive or passive aggressive communication styles, and conflict management skills, right? These are things that not all of us, are trained in or grow up being good communicators or conflict managers. So it's something that can be taught and learned. And then leadership styles within our agencies that are centered on authentic relationships, really caring about our staff, really caring about our leadership, and having those true authentic relationships with one another that are supportive and caring and empathetic. Some personal strategies: we really do have to be willing to acknowledge our own role, right, in the behaviors. Maybe we are a little bit passive aggressive in some situations. Those sorts of things. We have to understand what those behaviors look like in our workplace, that they do create a toxic workplace. So if we step away and stop engaging in those kinds of behaviors, we can diffuse it, not just in our workplace, but in our home, and really knowing that it is a barrier to healing. And then continuing to really examine our own perspectives and behaviors and beliefs, and be willing to continue our own healing. There's a reason why, we are feeling insecure in these settings, or feeling defensive in our workplace, or feeling defensive in our communities. And sometimes it's about them, but sometimes it's about us and how we respond. And it's really taking a look at those strategies and leaning into our own healing. So we really are resilient. So just really want to end with this notion that understanding that not all families carry the burden of what happened generations ago. Some may, right? Some may and some may not. Healing can be difficult in the face of current day trauma, and healing is less researched for tribal people. Stop there. Want to remind everyone that protective factor is cultural and or spiritual connectedness, being connected to your community and your family, and relationships in particular. But the caveat is that the relationship has to be, support is unconditional. The person has to be stable, and the child or the person has to trust the other person. It's a big piece of the conversation. And so, Thomas, we made it. Can you ask Mr. Rush if he can provide us with a closing prayer?
Thank you, Dr. Zimmerman, and everybody that presented, and also the First Lady and the President. Thank you. Chance, are you on for prayer? Chance? Rudy?
He should be coming on momentarily, Thomas.
Okay.
And then we'll go right into a quick closing, please.
Okay, we will. We'll do the prayer, and then Sonia and the staff will need to close out the Zoom right after prayer. But it's recorded, and we will have it available later. Chance?
Hey,
I can hear you.
I want to thank you guys for this opportunity. Everybody continue to play your part. Thank you for our leadership out of Navajo Nation, Dr. Zimmerman, for your words, and anyone else out there. We're in Mescalero, New Mexico, and so I do apologize. You guys, and I just want to give these words to you, and thank you all for being on the front line and providing your service. Again, like I said, we're out in New Mexico. We just did the tribe here, the Apache tribe. And I want to thank my brother Thomas Cody for the opportunity to be a part of this. And with that being said, I would like to call upon Rudy to close us out after these. You have to just few of my words. Rudy is Kickapoo and Rudy. Hello.
Hello. Can you guys see and hear me?
I can hear you, Rudy. Your connection's just really choppy.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm just gonna just go into this prayer. I'm just going to just say, Creator God, I just want to thank you for bringing us here and just being present in all of our lives through all the struggles and all the things that we go through on a daily basis. Creator God, I just want to thank